Acts 27. Guys, we are one chapter away after today of being done with the book of Acts. How exciting. And we've seen Paul really take off, and now he's facing some trouble. He's been arrested in Jerusalem. He's had trial after trial. He went up there before Felix. Now Festus has taken over. Then he had the trial with Agrippa. And King Agrippa was trying to figure out, what has this guy done? Has he broken the law? Is he truly deviating from what the Jews believe? And the answer was, I can't find a single reason why this guy should be held in prison. I can't find a single reason why this guy should be put to death. This guy's almost convinced me to join Christianity, and I'm an expert in the Jewish law. That was King Herod Agrippa's viewpoint. The same Herod Agrippa whose father, uncle, and grandfather all wanted to see Christianity, or the founders of Christianity, Jesus, be destroyed. So now we got a problem for Festus. He's got to send Paul off to Caesar because Paul had appealed to Caesar. So he has to send him without any good reason for sending him. But off he goes. So he appealed, and that's where he's going to go. And that's where we pick up in Acts 27, verse 1. It says, and when it was determined that we should sail to Italy, they delivered Paul and certain other prisoners to one named Julius, a centurion of Augustus's cohort. By the way, I think Julian will be in heaven. I think almost all the centurions we meet in the Bible will be in heaven. They all seem like good people, people who realize the truth. They may not outwardly say it, but they realize the truth, except for, of course, Cornelius. So verse 2 says, and boarding the ship of Adramyttium, which was about to sail alongside Asian places, we set sail, Aristarchus, a Macedonian from Thessalonica, being with us. Now notice the freedom that Paul continues to enjoy as a Roman citizen. Even though he had this major accusation, he's a prisoner, right? He's going for trial. But he gets to bring his friends with him. He gets to bring companions with him. This person from Thessalonica gets to come with him, Aristarchus, right? I mean, that's pretty cool. And then, of course, we know that Luke is going with him because he talks about how we did this, we did that. And of course, he's the author of our book here. So verse 3, he says, on the next day, we were landed at Sidon. And Julius treated Paul courteously and gave him liberty to go to his friends to receive care. And setting sail from there, we sailed close to Cyprus because the winds were contrary. And sailing over the sea against Cilicia and Pamphylia, we came to Myra of Lycia. And there the centurion found a ship of Alexandria sailing to Italy, and he put us on it. Now, Paul went from city to city to city, and he was given some freedom when he was in certain cities to visit those that he knew. Do you guys think that Paul ever wasted his time when he was in these cities? Or do you think he continued right on preaching like he always had? Think he cared that he was on his way probably to his death? That bother him? It's interesting to know, as Christians, at least from my perspective, when I feel like things are going right, and man, I'm going to church and everything's great and everyone's friendly and all is great, it sure is easy to preach. But man, when I'm struggling with my kids, or my money's not working right, or my house isn't working right and everything's falling apart, I'm fighting with the wife, I sometimes am not in the mood to get up and preach. Paul really didn't see it that way. He saw it as, I am only here to preach, and all this other stuff just gets in the way. And I'm going to do the other stuff, but I am here to preach. Okay. And that was his focus. And he didn't care if he felt good, if he felt bad, if he felt sick, if he felt well, if it was in season, if it was out of season. He wanted to preach the good news. And there's a good lesson in there for us. Because sometimes we're like, oh, I'm just so mad at them, I'm not going to talk to them right now. Guys, today is April 29th. You don't know if they have an April 30th, whoever they may be, right? Paul took that to heart. He made the message, he took the message wherever he went. And it doesn't say that here, but knowing the character of Paul, I know that's what he was doing. And when we see how Julius responds to Paul as the story goes on, we see that Julius was hearing the message too. everyone that's around Paul. Later on, when Paul's imprisoned in the house of Caesar, guess what he does? He preaches. Oh, to Caesar, but they have, they all worship Roman gods. There's no way they would reject him. He's like, and what are they going to do to you? I've got a message to share, and it's the message of Jesus Christ. So anyway, Julius, again, I think we'll see him in heaven. I think he's very fond of Paul, and I think he heard what Paul had to say. So we go up to verse 3. I'm sorry, not verse 3, but actually continuing on through verse 6, right? We saw that they had went everywhere. Now, notice the one thing that it said the wind was contrary, right? It said that they were going to sail, but the wind was contrary. And they found a ship that was going to go to Italy, so the centurion secured them passage. Notice it's not a military ship. It's a goods ship, right? A merchant ship. And they're just going to be able to sail on it. Now, the weather was not cooperating, so they went these short distances from little island to little island, okay? Verse 7 says, and sailing slowly many days, and with difficulty, coming abreast of Cnidus, the wind not allowing us, we sailed close to Crete across from Salmon. And coasting along with difficulty, we came to a place named Fair Havens. Near was a city, Lycia. So this trip across the Mediterranean, I don't know if you've seen a map of this area. The Mediterranean is not a massive sea. I mean, it's big, but it's not massive. But every step along the way, they've had trouble. They've had to make short little trips, and every time they go, the wind was contrary. It was difficult. Everything was going wrong. Now, Paul wasn't a sailor, but Paul did begin to understand whenever things seemed to happen with a purpose, even natural events. He was very spiritually conscious of what might be happening for a reason. So he had taken a lot of trips. Remember, his trips through Acts, sometimes he'd take it, they would take a day. And then he would go and take that same trip later on. It would take several days. Again, he would know he would be led by the Spirit. But there were many times where he's faced difficulty in traveling and knew when there was something that should be taken with a little more caution, a little more time. So this trip was not going to be simple. It was going to be dangerous. In October, which is about the time they're going, that anytime after that, it was dangerous to sail in the Mediterranean because there were winter storms. And anytime somebody names a storm, you know it's a bad one. Okay? If I just say there was a storm, that's one thing. If I say Katrina, did something, you're like, oh boy, we know Katrina's bad because those are a major hurricane. So we get down to verse 9 through 12. It says, and much time having been used up, and the voyage already being dangerous, because the fast was now already past, Paul warned them, saying, men, I perceive that this voyage is about to be with much harm and loss, and not only much cargo and of the ship, but also of our souls. But the centurion was rather persuaded by the helmsman and the shipmaster than by the things spoken by Paul. And the port not being fit to winter in, the most of them advised to set sail from there, if by any means they might be able to get to Phoenix to winter, which is a port of Crete looking towards the southwest and the northwest. So the sailors, they don't like the city they're in, right? They don't want to hang out all winter in some boring city of, Lycia. We want to go to Crete. That's where all the parties are. I mean, really, they're actually looking for a place that would be more favorable, a better tourist destination for them to hang out while they're waiting for the weather to change. So they wanted to go, and Paul's like, guys, you need to listen. This is going to be a dangerous trip, and we are going to lose not just our stuff, but possibly even our own lives. And the centurion, he's like, well, these people, they run ships. They know this stuff. I'm going to believe what they say. That also allows him to get back home sooner. So they'll soon learn that Paul probably has some more insight than they do. So verse 13 down to 17 says, and a south wind blowing softly, thinking to have obtained their purpose, lifting anchor, they sailed along close beside Crete. But not long after, a stormy wind called Euroclydon beat down on it. And the ship being seized and not being able to beat against the wind, giving way, we were borne along. And running under an islet being called Clauda, we hardly were able to become masters of the boat, which taking, they used helps undergirding the ship. fearing lest they should fall into the sandbanks of Syrtis, lowering the tackle, so they were borne along. So they started out with a gentle wind. Everything was gentle, everything was good. But instead of listening to what should have been their spiritual leader in the group, they said, oh, it seems favorable. This way looks fine. And they go down this path, only to find that gentle wind was the beginning of a massive storm system, Euroclydon, okay? And normally, when the ship goes through the water, you got ropes hanging everywhere. But when a storm starts beating on the ship, the nails that hold it together, the glue that holds it together, the pitch, it begins to crack. You know, when beams start to break off a ship, you get a little worried. So what they would do is they take these massive ropes and they would actually surround, like wrap the whole ship up. So imagine if right now this room was a ship. If I took a rope and wrapped it around these walls and then used a pulley to tighten it in to keep these walls from falling out. Does that make sense? So they would wrap them all over the ship to try to hold the ship together, to reinforce all the other things holding the ship together. That's how bad this storm was, okay? They were tying the ship together. That's what it talks about, using helps, right? And they're hoping for the best. Well, let's see if it works. Verse 18, and being exceedingly storm-tossed with a tempest, they made a casting on the next day. And on the third day, we threw out the ship's tackle with our hands. They actually, the prisoners and Paul's companions, even took part in trying to wrap the ship and ultimately cutting it loose from these ropes, because even though they were trying to hold it together, even the ropes were starting to break the ship. So it is a major problem they're in. So now we go to verse 20. It says, and neither sun nor stars appearing in many days, and no small tempest pressing hard. Now all hope that we should be saved was taken away. Why does it matter that they couldn't see the sun and the stars? It's cloudy, okay, big storm. What else? Exactly. They had no idea where they were. And for a sailor, most important thing is knowing where you are. You know where the reefs are. You know where the islands are. You know where it's safe to travel and not safe to travel. For a ship, especially these older ships, they would have a very deep part of the ship where it is under the water. And you hit a reef, you're dead, right? So this is a big deal for them. And they finally give up all hope. True despair sets in. They're terrified. They think it's over. And Paul's own companions, right, even think it's over, right? All hope that we should be saved was taken away. Even Luke said, this is it. We're done, right? So they threw some things in the water, some of the tackle, some of the net, like we talked about. And everyone wishes, I'm sure at this point, that they had listened to Paul. But it's a little, too late, right? And it's not like Paul's going to say, I told you so, right? He wouldn't say that because, you know, he's Paul. He's better than us, right? Let's continue verse 21. And there being much fasting, then standing up in their midst, Paul said, O men, I told you so. Not quite in so many words. He says, O men, being obedient to me, you ought not to have set sail from Crete. You should have listened when I told you don't go. And to have come by this harm and loss. All of this is because you didn't listen, okay? So he did tell him, he told you so. And the people, though, they were fasting. They hadn't eaten. And they hadn't eaten, one, because probably seasick, I would imagine, is one part of the story. Option number two is likely they were praying to whatever gods they served. They were all convinced they were going to die. They finally gave up hope that they could even be saved. But Paul had sent a message to them that came directly from God. God sent an angel and spoke to Paul. So read in verse 22. And now I exhort you to be of good cheer. I don't think anybody wanted to be cheerful, but he's like, hey guys, cheer up. This is going to be great. For there will be no casting away of life among you, only of the ship. You're going to lose your stuff, but you'll be saved. For tonight, an angel of God stood beside me, whose I am and whom I serve. I belong to God. And I think Julius is hanging on to every word here. Saying, fear not, Paul, you must stand before Caesar. And behold, God has given you all those who sail with you. Therefore, men, be of good cheer, for I believe God, that it will be so according to the way that it was told me. But we must fall on a certain island. He actually told them there's a specific island we're going to land on. We're going to lose everything, but we're going to be saved. So there's not going to be any question. They don't even know where they are. He just tells them, well, this is an island we're going to. They have no clue where they are. They don't think he has any clue where they are. But when they end up on that island, they be like, wait a minute, this guy clearly knows something we don't. So notice the faith that Paul has in the word of God. The angel told him, you are going to go to Rome. You will end up at Rome. Jesus himself told him, you will go to Rome. Remember, whenever he was in prison, he said, be of good cheer. You must also testify of me before Caesar. So despite being in prison, he's like, guys, cheer up. If anyone has a reason not to be cheerful right now, it would be Paul. But he says, every single person here with you for your sake is going to survive. So Paul takes security in God's promises in the worst storms of life. He trusts fully in God and tells people the good news in the worst storms of life. I think there's a sermon in there for any preachers out there, right? Talking about, there's a sermon where, because I mean, who hasn't faced a storm? And some of us worse than others.
One thing too, though, he don't have the word, but the written word,
Mm-hmm.
but he does get a visitation, a word from God.
Mm-hmm.
Anything that we want to put in between, that we have dreams, we have visions, we have whatever, and today, if we have to experience like that, we tend to question it.
Mm-hmm.
And in his situation that he is in, he's accepting this is God speaking to me. And he believes.
He puts his faith completely in the word God's have given him. Yeah, absolutely. And that's the whole idea is our default is to question God.
Right.
Our default is to not trust in his promises. When he says, I have sealed you until the day of redemption. Oh, but what if hang on a minute. Did he say he sealed you? Have you accepted? Go ahead.
Now there's another thing, back in chapter 9, remember he told Ananias, he says, he is going to this Israel, the Gentiles, and before kings.
And before kings, right. He's fulfilling the promises from way back then. Absolutely. Because the word of God, guys, no matter what you think, not only does it not fail, it cannot fail. When God makes a promise, it's not that he doesn't break promises, not just that he delights in not in keeping promises. He cannot break his promise. He cannot lie. The Bible tells it is impossible for God to lie. Don't listen to anyone who says God can do anything. No, he cannot. There are some things he cannot do. He cannot go against his own nature. He is a merciful, loving God. And he will err on the side of mercy. When I say err, I don't mean he makes a mistake. I mean he gives grace instead of punishment. Instead of what would be fair, he gives us grace. And he can't lie. And we can trust his word, and he just like Paul trusted his word. All right. So
that first word he received from God, this is years later, he's still
trusting in the words God gave him from before. Yeah, because whenever he was visited in the prison, it was at least 2 to 3 years earlier. Excuse me. All right, so now we get to verse 27. Now, notice these people, they've been drifting along miserable. And I don't know if you've ever been on a boat when you're rocked by the waves. It is not comfortable. So get to verse 27. Let's see how long they've been drifting. But when the 14th night came, we were carried about in the Adriatic Sea. And about midnight, the sailors thought that they drew near some country. So the sailors are like, I think we're near some landmass here, okay? And sounding, they found it 20 fathoms. Sounding is checking the depth. They said it's 20 fathoms, where we can feel the bottom. And then they, a little further, sounding again, they found it 15 fathoms. Uh-oh, it's getting closer. The bottom is moving up, and we still have no idea where we are and what we're going to hit. So they're pretty concerned. Now, it would seem the sailors, the people who owned the ship, they did not have faith in what Paul had said. They didn't have faith in God's wisdom and what God told them. So what he says in verse 29, he says, "And fearing that we would fall on rocks and casting 4 anchors out of the stern, they wished day to come." They were hoping to be able to see this land. But the sailors, seeking to flee out of the ship, they were going to abandon the ship and leave the prisoners, lowering the boat onto the sea, pretending to be about to cast out anchors from the prow. So they were pretending they're going to take these anchors out and drop them down to keep the boat steady. But what they were going to do, get the anchors out, drop them on the side, and take their lifeboats and go to the landmass that they think is there, right? They do not plan on saving anyone there. Paul said to the centurion and to the soldiers, "Unless these remain in the ship, you cannot be saved. We need this whole crew to stay here, or we're all going to die." That's pretty much what's going to happen. So the sailors, again, they're trying to sneak away, but Paul's calling the shots. The prisoner, remember in the Old Testament, there was another prisoner who ran the prison. Remember who that was? Joseph, exactly. So Joseph, he was put in charge of the prison that he was a prisoner in. And here we see Paul, he's a prisoner on the ship, telling the centurion what to do and having the centurion in charge of the sailors, right? God has elevated him. So he goes, and the soldiers, he tells his soldiers, "Hey, go cut the ropes with the boats." So as the boats are being lowered in, they cut the ropes and off goes the little lifeboats. They're gone. They weren't lifeboats at the time, but yeah, you get the idea. And verse 33 says, "And until day was about to come, Paul begged all to take food, saying, 'This is the 14th day that you continued waiting without food, having taken nothing. Therefore, I beg you to take some food. This is for your deliverance, for not a hair of your head shall perish.' And saying these things and taking bread, he gave thanks to God before all, and breaking, he began to eat. And they all becoming cheered, they also took food. And we were, all the souls in the ship, 276. And being filled with food, they lightened the ship, throwing the wheat into the sea." So when everything is falling apart, do the Christians remain faithful to Jesus and trust in him? When the whole storm is going, when the sailors are saying, "We're going to wreck, the bottom's moving up, we're all going to die." Paul's like, "Guys, have some food. Cheer up. You got to trust God." When the rubber hits the road, for a modern statement, right? How do the Christians respond? Do we panic in the same way the world panics? Do we despair in the same way the world despairs? Sometimes we do, maybe. But should we? Ought we? Or should we trust in God? Should we put complete confidence and faith in God? And when we do, we calm others down too. When people see us in the challenges of life, we've got people in this study that have major health challenges, right? Seizures and other problems, yet they remain faithful and trust in God. That speaks volumes. We have people who have lost loved ones, children, yet they continue to trust in God. We have people who have been betrayed, been turned away, been mistreated, and they continue to trust in God. That speaks way more volumes than just, speaking words or whatever, making talk. Actually living the life and trusting in God through the hardest times. And that's exactly what he did. And he brought joy, and 276 people on that boat are now eating, which is important because they're going to need their energy. Okay. So they again, Paul was so sure that they were going to be saved. They took all the rest of the food and dumped it overboard. All the rest of the food is now gone. The ship is now lighter. Now, from a practical level, what does that mean for how deep the ship is sunk? It's now a little lighter. It's more towards the surface. So you now aren't quite as close to the bottom, right? So you don't have to worry about it being almost going to hit the ground, at least not as much. And when the day came, verse 39, they did not recognize the land, but they discovered a certain bay with a beach, into which they were minded, if they were able, to drive the ship. And casting off the anchors, they left them in the sea. So they let the boat drift into this bay. They cut off the anchors and they're off drifting into the sea. And at the same time, they loosed the rudder bands and hoisted up the foresail to the wind and held to the shore. And coming on a place between two seas, they drove the vessel. And indeed, the prow sticking fast, it remained unmovable. But the stern was broken with the violence of the waves. So they were able to lodge it in this lagoon type area, this waterway that came in. They were able to lodge it in the middle, and it was stuck fast, remaining unmovable. But the back end of the boat was getting torn apart by the waves. And the soldiers, if the prisoners got away, the soldier who was assigned to the prisoner would have to fulfill their sentence. That's a big deal. So a lot of times that meant death. So the soldiers, they said, let's just kill all the prisoners. That way, at least we'll be free. Because if we try to abandon ship, the ship's falling apart. We have to abandon ship. There is a high likelihood some of these prisoners will escape. And now we are going to have to take their punishment. So they said, let's kill the prisoners, which would be the wise thing to do. But the centurion, desiring to save Paul, good old Julius, Orange Julius here, he shows up and he wants to save Paul. So he kept them from their purpose and commanded those who could swim to throw themselves overboard and to go out on the land. Imagine if they hadn't eaten. They would no way have had the energy to do this. And the rest went, some on boards and others on the things from the ship. And so it happened that all were saved on the land. This would be a very interesting or great scene in a movie, would it not? Like this whole event is pretty remarkable. But again, where is your faith? Is it in your car and in your brakes? Was it for Paul? Was it in the ship or the experience of the sailors? When you get on an airplane, is it, how sturdy is the airplane? How great's the pilot? Or is your faith in God? And is your trust in God? And when your time comes, are you still trusting in God when you're going through these storms? I hope that you are. But you see, for Paul, that's exactly what he did. He continued to put his trust in God, and he continued even through this horrible, horrible event. But don't worry, the folks on the island, he still has a couple snakes to deal with, or at least one snake. So there's one more chapter. We'll pick up next time. Any final comments on Acts 27? Or questions or whatever.
What Bible you read? What version?
I only study the King James Version, but I'll read any version, but I only study the King James.
You're reading something else?
You weren't reading King James there, was you?
Are you sure? Maybe I had switched it. Okay, well, then this one I may have copied and pasted it from another, but I almost always just study the King James. If this one was copied and pasted, I may have switched it because I do, for my kids reading, I'll switch to the modern King James, and that may be what happened. So it is the King James. They just removed the these and thous.
Yeah.
So it's there. Is that which one did you notice? What word did you pay attention to?
A bunch of them.
Really? Okay. I'll have to look into it. But no, almost always I use the King James not because I think the King James is a better translation. I think the source text for the King James and the modern King James and the New King James is actually more, I believe it's more accurate than the source text they use for the more modern versions. It's just based on the different texts of the originals.
Okay,
Yes,
I just want to write him out. When he uses examples, he says like you had a bad day, you fought with the wife. He doesn't like it.
No, never, not at all. We don't ever fight. Okay, guys, we'll take a 5-minute break